It is Friday, and we are working for Crusoe. Friday, April 4th, 2025. In Los Angeles, he is Sam Park. In Las Vegas, not in a CIA black site, but actually just in an embassy suites. I'm John Ramey. Sam, this is not the best background, but, deadlines are real.
Hey, that's the way things go.
So I'm counting on you for background ambiance. In today's episode, we will discuss systems of government where criminal leaders face justice and systems of government where they wreck the global economy. We have political leaders in South Korea and France facing consequences, and we have Donald Trump taking a blowtorch to American economic hegemony and destroying the global economic order. And let's start in South Korea. CNN reporting South Korea's highest court has removed embattled President Yoon Suk-yeol from office, ending months of uncertainty and legal wrangling after Yoon briefly declared martial law in December and plunged the nation into political turmoil. The court's decision Friday, today, marks Yoon's formal dismissal from the presidency after Parliament voted to impeach him late last year. His removal takes effect immediately, meaning he must now leave the presidential residence and will trigger an election to replace him. It's a remarkable fall from grace for the former prosecutor turned politician who rose to prominence for his role in the impeachment and imprisonment of another president years ago, only to now meet the same fate. That is lovely writing, CNN. Yeah. Illegal acts as president have consequences in South Korea, the Republic of Korea.
Yes, apparently. And I want to just remark that this took place over a period of just 4 months, right? We discussed Yoon's declaration of martial law, which was the root of his impeachment. And that took place at the beginning of December. And it was reversed almost immediately. The population and the legislators stood up and said, no, you can't declare martial law. And so I think it was 6 hours elapsed between a declaration of martial law and its rescission. And within 4 months, the president has been impeached and removed from office. And that's, 4 months is not no time at all, but it's reasonably swift course of justice. And I think it's really remarkable that it took place in such a quick time frame. And the Constitutional Court ruled that there was no emergency that justified Yoon's declaration of martial law. It's not that declaring martial law is, in and of itself unconstitutional. It's just that Yoon had no right to do it in the circumstances that were facing him at the beginning of December.
The Constitutional Court is the Supreme Court in South Korea.
That's right. In an analogy to our system, though, they would play the role of the Senate in an impeachment proceeding. As we discussed in one of our earlier episodes when we were talking about this impeachment process, the South Korean legislature has only one chamber. And so they act in an analogous fashion to our House of Representatives, who would hand down the impeachment to the Senate. But since South Korea doesn't have the Senate, it falls to the Constitutional Court to enact the impeachment, or to actually decide whether impeachment is warranted.
Okay, let's just do a quick side-by-side comparison. The United States has a blatantly illegal executive who tried to overthrow an election with a violent mob storming the Capitol. And 4 years later, not only does he not face consequences or being barred from office or running, he's been reelected.
That's right.
So it makes our system look rather sclerotic, I believe is the term.
I think that would be a very appropriate term to use in this case. And so as a consequence of this, Yoon is not just ejected from the presidency. He is also banned for life from ever seeking public office again. And he still faces criminal proceedings, which are ongoing. The other result is that South Korea will face a new election within 60 days from the handing down of the impeachment decision yesterday, or early this morning, Korea time, that is. And so the party of the now former President Yoon, that is the People's Power Party, has to decide on who their candidate's going to be. And this will be a somewhat weighty decision for them to make.
Gerald Ford's not available.
No, he's not. He's really rather unavailable, I think we would have to say. But
again, remarkable. 60 days from the removal from office, an election, right? Whereas I'm using Ford as the example. Nixon resigned rather than face impeachment, and he would have been removed.
That's right.
But Ford, again, the system, it's just baroque.
That's right.
Compared to South Korea.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, meanwhile, the main opposition party, that is the Democratic Party of Korea, their candidate will be the party leader. I can't remember his name. Lee is his surname, and so he'll face an as yet unknown candidate from the PPP, and so we'll be returning to this. Now, mind you, 60 days is the limit, right? That is, the election has to be held within 60 days.
So it could be sooner.
It could be sooner, but I doubt it'll be much sooner because, again, the PPP doesn't know who their candidate's going to be, so they're going to have to figure that out. And so
that's going to be, you're going to need a real loyalist to dive on the grenade, right?
Well, exactly. And I mean, it'll be a sort of awkward position for that person to be in, whoever that ends up being. So we'll return to this story when the election comes up. But again, that'll be a couple months down the road. As you say, the comparison between the South Korean system and our own is rather stark, I would say. But it's not the only country in which a potential president is facing criminal justice. So we might want to move on to the other one.
This is about the French leader, Marine Le Pen. But Reuters reporting Thursday, U.S. President Donald Trump offered support to French far-right leader Marine Le Pen on Thursday after a Paris court earlier this week convicted her and 24 figures from her National Rally party of embezzling European Union funds. A judge handed Le Pen an immediate 5-year ban on running for office that will bar her from the 2027 presidential election unless she can get the ruling overturned on appeal beforehand. The judge is now under police protection after facing death threats, a source told Reuters Wednesday. Le Pen, RN allies, and her supporters accused the trial judges of interfering in democracy. French Prime Minister François Bayrou told lawmakers Tuesday that he, quote, unconditionally supported the judiciary. In a Truth Social post late on Thursday, Trump called the case against Le Pen, sing along if you know the words, a witch hunt, while praising the far-right leader. He said, among other things, they got her on a minor charge that she probably knew nothing about. Sounds like a bookkeeping error to me. So again, in France, where they have had many revisions to their Republican system, politicians acting illegally have faced criminal consequences and cannot simply just win the next election and erase their wrongdoing.
Well, okay, first of all, she might end up still being the RN candidate for president.
Fine, but she's still got to jump through some hoops to do so. She doesn't have to just win a non-existent primary.
That's right. The courts are saying that they hope to hear her appeal in plenty of time for her to still run if the appeal is successful. That is, if her conviction is overturned. I think it's worth pointing out, though, that former presidents and prime ministers of France have been criminally convicted for political embezzlement charges, including the former president Jacques Chirac.
Sarkozy, too?
I can't remember.
No, Chirac did? Yeah, okay.
Chirac definitely did. And the former prime minister Alain Juppé also was convicted of political embezzlement. And in this case, it's not that Le Pen didn't know anything about this. All right. The Constitutional Court, I'm sorry, not the Constitutional Court, but the court that heard this case found that she was an integral part of this embezzlement scheme, which involved creating fake jobs, supposedly to staff the RN's European Union operations, but that were actually just going to fund the French, that is the RN's domestic political operations. Now, this, on some level, might seem like a sort of ticky-tack foul, to borrow a sports term. Sorry.
Shout out Chick Hearn.
That's right. But if she was as involved as her conviction says she was, this would seem to be pretty open and shut.
Sam, it's as ticky-tack as maybe Watergate, right?
Sure, exactly, right?
Right, like actually bad. Just
Yeah.
our sense of perspective is all out of whack now.
But it's not just that. But the RN, or what was formerly the Front National, and now is the
National Rally.
Rassemblement National, usually formerly the National Front, now the National Rally. They have always presented themselves to the French public as the honest alternative to the corruption that has existed in the mainstream political parties of France. Le Pen herself, when Chirac and Juppé faced their criminal cases, said that anybody who is guilty of political embezzlement should be imprisoned. Right? So she's now adopting this entirely hypocritical stance of, say, oh, well, this is just, it's a witch hunt or whatever. And so we'll have to see how this works out for her going forward. But again, this is the rule of law. This is much like in South Korea. This is how the system is supposed to operate. If there's criminality at the highest levels of government, it needs to be investigated. And if laws were broken, people need to be charged. We can't have public servants who are above the law. And this would seem to be uncontroversial. But it's, as you pointed out, in the case of our own country and the defenses being mounted by both Yoon and Le Pen, it's not. It's in contention whether these people should be held to the same standards as the other citizens of their supposedly democratic countries.
Just before we move on, the Rassemblement National, the National Rally, are they as far right as Alternative for Germany? Are we calling RN? Are they fascists, or are they just extremely anti-immigrant? Or is it potato?
Well, much like the AFD, they have their roots in very far right ideas. Sure. For instance, Le Pen père, that is Jean-Marie Le Pen, Marine Le Pen's father, was a Holocaust denier. Or he referred to the Holocaust as a detail of history, I think was the memorable phrase that he used to talk about it.
I'm sure it sounds nicer in the original French.
That's right. Well, I'm not so sure about that.
Yeah, no. But I mean, that's the funny thing about France. They've always had fascism.
Oh, yeah. I mean, back before the war, when France decided to surrender to the Nazis, a bunch of them didn't need to be asked twice.
That's right.
That wasn't the universal position, but many people thought that it would be better than, for instance, if France ended up going communist. And there was a thriving communist party in France at that time. That wasn't an unrealistic idea that it could turn out that way. But it's difficult to make a like-by-like comparison between the AFD and the RN, just because the RN's been around so much longer. And they've got a couple decades of head start on the AFD. And Marine Le Pen herself has moderated the stance of the RN in a way that the AFD simply hasn't had time to do. They might do that, they might not. But the point is that there has been a progression of the RN over the years. And so it's hard to compare them directly with the AFD, I would say.
Speaking of fascism in France, it's Liberation Day week. That's a joke, folks, because France had to be liberated by the United States from fascists. Part of what makes America great is the fact that we destroyed fascism once.
Well, okay.
Or at least defeated it. I guess we didn't destroy it.
We didn't destroy it because, in fact, even then, it was allowed to persist in Spain for another 30 years.
Fair
And
enough.
so this is something that I think people need to remember. Okay. America did not end fascism in Europe.
No, we didn't end it. We just beat it. Okay, Politico reporting today. China's announcement of 34% tariffs on U.S. imports this morning, Friday morning, overshadowed the better than expected jobs report and triggered another day of tumbling stocks. Beijing said its retaliatory measures would begin on April 10th and match President Donald Trump's, quote, reciprocal 34% measure that he ordered Wednesday, the AP report from Bangkok. The Chinese government also said it will, quote, impose more export controls on rare earths, which are materials used in high-tech products such as computer chips and electric vehicle batteries, end of quote. The AP reporting, President Donald Trump announced far-reaching new tariffs on nearly all U.S. trading partners, a 34% tax on imports from China and a 20% tariff on the European Union, among others, that threaten to dismantle much of the architecture of the global economy and trigger broader trade wars. This was announced in the Rose Garden Wednesday. He also said he's imposing a 10% baseline tax on imports from all countries in response to what he called an economic emergency. I'll tell you what the economic emergency is, Sam. I need a new iPhone, and I'm going to get it this weekend because it's probably going to cost $3,000 soon.
Well, it's going to cost more, I think, is pretty much a guarantee. Although, I mean, as we've discussed before, the Apple company has very high profit margins. And
so they can, sure, if they want to keep their market share, they can eat it a little bit.
Yeah, they might. And I think,
but their stocks are taking a hit.
Sure, but let's face it, they're still an enormously valuable company.
Fine.
But all I'm saying is your particular iPhone might not cost all that much more money as you think.
Okay, but whatever, cars, phones, everything. I mean, we import a lot of stuff.
That's right. I mean, I think it's worth taking a moment to at least try and appreciate the scale of what Donald Trump is trying to do right now.
He's trying to destroy the economic order established after the last war.
There was a headline on Liberation Day on the BBC that said, Trump poised to reshape global economy and how world does business. And I thought this was a very concise headline for the BBC to employ here, because that actually is what the end game here. As long as the tariffs stay in place, which we don't know if they will, but Trump and all of his staff are saying that they will not relent. And it'll be, I think that's the most important question that remains, is how long is this going to last? And if it does last a long time, then it's going to be an enormous undertaking. And I think the consequences of it are difficult to foresee. And
is this a black swan event, Sam?
Only, I would say it's not, only because...
Or not yet?
Well, I mean, in a black swan event, it's something that nobody saw coming. Right?
Well,
whereas,
I guess this disqualifies it from that.
Yeah, Trump has said over and over again that he intended to do this or to do something like this, although what he ended up doing was not what he said he was going to do, which is something we might want to explore a little bit.
Okay, just real quick, before we get into the details, I assume all our listeners understand this, but just big picture, what's wrong with reshaping the way the world does business? There are still poor people, right? Isn't Donald Trump just going to give Americans a fairer shake? Let's just pick apart this argument, right? The way the world does business has prevented great power war and has ushered in an era of unprecedented prosperity for not only the United States, but the human race, right?
For the most part, yes. I mean,
so you might want to tweak it. You don't want to burn it down.
I would agree with that entirely, but that's not the way Donald Trump sees it. Now, before we go any further, I just want to say, okay, that this is our first episode of the month of April. Our last episode will be of the month, that is, will be a very special working for Crusoe because it'll be the first one after Trump's 100th day in office, which is a widely used measure of the progress of a new president. So on that day, in that episode, we will take a look at this issue, certainly, but and examine in a very broad sense how it fits in with, for instance, his national security posture and other elements of his foreign policy. So today, I think we should rightly focus on the immediate economic impact in as much as we can discern it. But to answer your question, Trump said for weeks, April 2nd will be Liberation Day, and it would involve reciprocal tariffs. And he said this over and over again. And I think that's one of the reasons why, for instance, financial markets were relatively calm at the beginning of this week and at the end of last week, right? Because if you're instituting reciprocal tariffs, people can at least try and game out what that might look like. Now, we discussed that reciprocal tariffs would actually be very, very difficult to do. For instance, we import Parmesan cheese from Italy, right? I eat it frequently. Italy doesn't import Parmesan cheese from us, right? So if you're charging reciprocal tariffs, what are we supposed to? What is Italy going to be charging tariffs from us, right? It doesn't make any sense. You have to go product by product, tariff by tariff, and figure out what the corresponding product is. As if responding to that criticism, the Trump administration, in the weeks leading up to Liberation Day, seemed to indicate, okay, well, we're not actually going to do that. We're going to divide countries into categories and, sort of calculate average tariffs and charge the same tariffs to them, just to make it, to stop it from being this incredible bureaucratic and accounting nightmare. Instead
of unimaginably Byzantine, only totally Byzantine.
That's right. It would be complicated, but it at least would make a little bit more sense. That's not what they did. Okay, what they did was to calculate these tariffs that they're charging on all countries based on the trade deficits that we have with those countries.
Okay, and Trump seems to think a trade deficit is inherently bad, and that's not true.
That's right, and that I think was why
that's at the root of this.
That's why this was so shocking to people, right? Is that this doesn't even make any sense at all. And some of the first people to object were economists, right? Who were just throwing flags on the field right and left saying, that's not how this works.
I thought we got rid of all the pointy-headed bureaucrats with their briefcases. Sam.
Not yet, no. I mean, the fact is some of them are American citizens, so you can't just deport them to El Salvador. But
they can still express their opinion in public.
Yeah, and this is just insane, okay? The trade deficit, that's the end of the calculation, right? That's after you do all the math and say, okay, well, you sold us this much stuff and we sold you this much stuff, and the difference is the trade deficit. Okay, but having a trade deficit in and of itself, a lot of economists, not all of them, mind you, but a lot of them would say that's not actually a problem. The fact is, we just buy more stuff.
Okay, like Bangladesh. I think that's where Levi's are manufactured. Right?
Well, quite a lot of clothing is manufactured there. Yeah.
Right.
That's an excellent example, though.
We're going to have a trade deficit with Bangladesh because there are more Americans buying Levi's than probably anything or the total of things we sell to Bangladesh.
Yes, and what is Bangladesh going to buy from us? F-150s?
Right.
What
fighter jets?
Yeah, what do we produce that they really need to buy?
That's going to be the equivalent to our apparel industry.
Right, exactly, right. And so, again, this is a perfect example of why just by itself a trade deficit is meaningless. But
it's value neutral, and he seems to think it's or morally neutral.
That's right, and
there's a moral negativity equivalent.
He seems to put it in the same category as the budget deficit,
like a financial deficit. Yeah,
right. Yeah, and that's the amount of money that we spent, that the federal government spends in excess of the taxes that the federal government collects. And so we need to borrow that money from investors. The Federal Reserve buys a lot of that debt. Foreign investors buy a lot of that debt. And all, our children and grandchildren, even though, John, either you or I have children, right?
That's right.
But Americans' children and grandchildren are going to eventually need to repay that debt. That is a problem, right? But with the trade deficit, that's not money we owe to anybody. That's money we pay. All right.
No, we just buy more Levi's from Bangladesh than they buy from us.
Yes. And so if we're charging tariffs to any country based on the trade deficit, this will never go away. I mean, or it will be very difficult to make it go away. Let's put it that way. Right? I don't go to
global depression will make it go away, maybe.
That's right. I don't go to the supermarket and say, okay, I'm going to buy all my groceries today, but only if you agree to buy something from me. Okay, this is just
right. You have a trade deficit with Ralph's.
Yes, that's right. I mean, I'm buying stuff from them all the time. Yeah. What do they buy from me? Nothing. And so this is just a ridiculous way. And I think that's why this is so alarming to people, is that it doesn't seem to be based on anything, and it cannot
except for his misunderstanding of the word deficit.
Yeah, it cannot be fixed in any reasonable way. But that's the world we're going to live in for a little while anyway, unless this decision is reversed, which they say it will not be.
I mean, there are bad ideas and there are bad ideas. And again, this is a foreign affairs and economics podcast, so I don't want to lean too heavily into the politics of this, but every single reputable published voice in the United States said that if the things Donald Trump was talking about during this campaign were put in effect, that it was going to be terrible. And
this is worse.
Yeah. And this is that plus. And I don't really know how to process that. Like, he's a criminal. He's got bad ideas. Why would you give him the most power of any man walking the earth? Like, I don't understand how the air quotes wisdom of the American people saw fit to put this man in this position.
Okay, well, let's back up a little.
But that is a different podcast.
Yes, I mean, the fact is that during Trump's first term, until the COVID-19 pandemic started, the United States economy was doing very, very well.
It was.
And Trump instituted a certain number of tariffs, which had bad impacts upon the U.S. economy, but they were relatively small. But that is, both the tariffs were relatively small, and the impacts that they had on the economy were just sort of came out in the wash of what was overall a very strong economy. So
and let's also point out, targeted tariffs can be good if you have some kind of protectionist agenda, which isn't inherently bad.
That's right.
When it's targeted.
Yes, but those
when it's surgical.
Yes, the tariffs that Trump instituted really didn't do very much for anybody except for a couple of different factories in the United States. On the whole, people ended up paying more for like washing machines and things like this. And there was retaliation from China against American farmers. So Trump ended up having to bail out the farmers. So whatever money was collected from the tariffs just ended up being spent almost immediately trying to bail out the farmers who were hurt by China's retaliation. Speaking of which, what's roiling markets today is China's retaliation for Liberation Day. And we can put up a little graphic here from a detail of today's headline in the Global Times, or the front page of the Global Times website. And there's three different stories here I want to look at. The first one is in the middle there, where you see that China hits back at U.S. with 34% extra tariffs. And they're suing us at the WTO, which doesn't really mean anything. But the point is, they're instituting retaliatory tariffs. But there are two other stories on this front page that I want to point out. Then the top one is China's General Administration of Customs suspends import qualifications of 6 U.S. enterprises. Those enterprises are large agricultural exporters in the United States who export agricultural products to China. So
that's not going to help the trade deficit at all.
No, that's not a retaliatory tariff. That's a boycott, essentially, right? They're saying these companies are not going to sell into our country anymore. Now, again, it says suspends, right? So this could be a temporary measure, and this is ostensibly an unrelated story, but I think we all know it's not at all unrelated.
China's a big market. That's gonna make an impact.
They buy a lot of agricultural products from the United States, or they did. And the other story I want to point out is below the main story, where it says Chinese market regulator launches anti-monopoly probe into DuPont. Okay, DuPont is as we know, major chemical company here in the United States. Again, this is supposedly an anti-monopoly probe, but I don't think that there's any question in anybody's mind why it is they're doing this.
Taking the Chinese market away from DuPont.
That's right. Now, in the lead up to Liberation Day and on the day, Trump and his officials were saying, don't retaliate, foreign countries, because you'll just make it worse. China said, yeah, sorry, we are going to retaliate. And China, as we know, is the main villain in the narrative of American deindustrialization. And it's true. They added manufacturing jobs by the million while the United States was losing many manufacturing jobs.
Those were decisions made by American businesses, I will point out.
That's right.
So it's a co-villain.
Sure. But the point is that while we're looking at this, if these tariffs stick around, Trump's goal of restoring manufacturing to the United States to some degree will be achieved, right? If American businesses believe that these tariffs are going to be permanent, they will bring manufacturing capacity back to the United States.
But Sam, it takes years to build a factory. It's going to take years for businesses to believe this is real.
Okay. A lot of them will not need to build factories. There are plenty of unused factory facilities in this country that could be retooled. And
that's still going to take time.
It will take time, but this has happened before.
Sure.
Right? There were no, when I was a kid, and when you were a kid too, John, there were no Toyota plants or Volkswagen plants in this country, but there are now because it was made clear to those companies that they would face some sort of trade penalties if they didn't try to bring some of their production into the United States. Now, this was a sensible business decision for those companies to make anyway, right? Because if you want to sell cars in the United States, it's actually in many ways more efficient to just assemble your factories there, right? So to some degree, this will happen. But could it actually happen to the degree to replace all of international trade? I mean, and never mind that
Chinese manufacturing is a big sector.
That's right. And on top of this, we don't grow coffee in this country because we can't. All right. And so if you're putting tariffs on coffee, there's no goal.
Look, the west coast of Hawaii can't match the demand.
That's right.
Of the Big Island.
There's nothing that you can hope to achieve by doing this.
No.
And so now, again, in our end of the month episode, we'll have a few weeks to see what the impact of this has been. That won't be long enough, as we're pointing out right now. Okay, but we'll at least be able to see what has occurred since today. But
even if that does happen, Sam, those are going to be half are going to be automated jobs.
Yeah, and that's the other part of it.
I mean,
right?
we're not.
Just because you're building a factory, you're going to need
way
to
more
hire
than half, maybe, but at least half.
Yeah, just if you're building a factory, you will need to hire some people to oversee the factory. But if you're facing a higher cost environment, you would think it might be in your interest to automate every single process you might be able to, right? And, never mind the revolution going on in artificial intelligence. You might want to avail yourself of that sort of technology just to save on labor costs, because about half of what we import in this country is it's not products, it's what economists call inputs, right? That is raw materials, energy, right? All of these things are going to be more expensive. And so if you're bringing your manufacturing capacity back to this country and you're facing higher input costs, you're going to want to save in every other level you possibly can. And so I think this is why this is so frightening to so many people. It's just it doesn't seem to add up. The equation that we're using to determine these things doesn't make sense to begin with.
Which we'll put up right here.
Yeah, and what you're trying to achieve doesn't even seem possible. Or even if it is possible, it will be very difficult. And if you're just going to reorder the entire world economy, then which the Commerce Secretary, Howard Lutnick, says he thinks should happen. He said on television,
I know,
you should let Donald Trump run the world economy. Now, first of all, that's a terrible idea. But even if it were not...
That's a 1-minute warning, Sam.
All right. Even if it were not a terrible idea, it's not capitalism.
No, that's certainly not a free market. All right. Well, I'm sufficiently terrified. Good job, Sam. And thanks, everybody, for sticking around on this one. We'll be back next week. And anything on tap?
Just I'm sure there'll be plenty of things. Yeah, I mean, again, I'm sure we'll return to this story along with whatever. Hopefully, we can talk about Israel and Sudan
Maybe
and
South
things
Sudan,
like this before
or Sudan, rather. Yeah.
Well, maybe South Sudan also.
Yeah. All right. He's Sam. I'm John. Have a great weekend, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.